Hey, church, welcome back to More Than That. I have a really, really awesome guy next to me, Paul Carey, who he's popped in every once in a while, so you may have seen him here and there. He's got a little bit of a unique story, and I'm going to let him kind of, take the reins on the story. But his passage this week was Genesis, and it was a specific verse 8. And I'll just read it because it's a single verse, and we don't have to labor it too long by reading the full passage that you had for context. But 2:8 is, the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he placed the man he had formed. I was waiting for it to go longer.
When it's just one verse, it's like,
it's just one sentence.
It's done.
Yeah, well, just like the way that it was reading, I was like, oh, it's a longer sentence. It just felt like it was gonna be a longer sentence.
Yeah.
That was your passage. But before we hop into something that we were talking just before this about, something you left out that you really wanted to hit on. So before we do that, and before you get into it, tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and because it's really cool, and I'm kind of low-key jealous of where you're going.
Yeah. So I also had an opportunity Sunday to share a little bit before the sermon that God's called me to be a missionary in Scotland. And it's a longer story. I would love to sit down and share the whole story of how God confirmed that it was Scotland he was calling me to go to. The short version is, I went to seminary there. When I graduated, I really wanted to stay, but there wasn't an opportunity to stay. And 4 years later, the pastor of the church there, who had encouraged me to continue pursuing missions and told me he didn't think Scotland was right at the time, reached out and invited me back.
Wow.
And so I got that personal invitation to go to Scotland, work with this church as they are a church planting church. They were planted in 2014. Their vision and sort of passion has been to be a church plant. And so they supported by training a lot of young guys to be church planters, launched them to go in different parts of the country, and then just this past year have launched their own daughter church in the suburbs of Edinburgh, as well as brought on a Chilean pastor to lead a Hispanic congregation. Okay. So sort of two new congregations out of this church in the past year.
And it is Edinburgh, by the way. It's not Edinburgh.
Yep. Swallow that G.
So what, whenever you actually make it to Scotland in Edinburgh, what's your role going to look like? Do you know?
Yeah. So I'm not ordained, but it'll be sort of like a executive pastor type of role, where I'll be helping bring organization and administration to bear in the life of the church. They are these three different congregations that share a lot of resources, and they need someone to sort of be the point person who knows what's going on in different places. Just in January, the senior pastor announced that he was stepping down to take a new role as a church planting worker for a group called City to City. City to City Europe. They were started in New York by Tim Keller.
Oh, okay.
So it's a good change. It uses his skills really well, but that means the church, the mother church, Cornerstone, is now looking for a new pastor and has a vacancy. And so a lot of need for someone to step in and sort of help out with that. And that will use my interest and abilities in music. I trained the music guy who's there now. And I'll come and support him in helping plan the services for the different congregations, making sure the musicians are there and things like that. And then a lot of discipleship. The church has been growing through conversions. And they had 2 or 3 adult baptisms last year. There's a lot of young believers, and the need for then people to disciple, come alongside and help them grow in their faith.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I was listening to a podcast by one of the guys that I respect in the apologetics and philosophy community, who actually went to St. Andrews. And for his doctorate, and he was saying about just some of the things going on over in Europe right now. There are so many guys our age that are flocking to church. So it'll be really cool to hear, through your newsletter and things like that, to see how many, what's that actually like on the ground. Because I mean, it's one thing because he was in maybe I think Finland or maybe Philly whenever he recorded it, but he was just that's crazy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not, because of all of these other cultural aspects that are going on. So it'll be really interesting to see, from a pastor's perspective, what that's going to look like.
Yeah. And, there was just a report put out by I think the British Bible Society did a survey in England and Wales. And the report's called The Silent Revival.
Oh, wow.
And it's showing that the demographics of the church are now a U. There's a lot of old people, and there's a lot of people, 30 and younger. Not a lot in between, but that's the U. But there's that return from that young generation who are looking for meaning and purpose and finding that define it for yourself worldview just doesn't work. Going to school and seminary and everything, it was like I feel like the seminary that I went to was more, I would say, more in the classical end of thought rather than like the modern era of like philosophical thought. And it was just one of those things where like we hit on postmodernism hard, but what's crazy to me is the like kids that are younger than us are hitting on it hard too. They're just like, this doesn't make sense. Like, you can have your ivory tower people up there talking like, oh, truth doesn't exist, all this other stuff. But the kids now are like, that's not, lived experience is a real thing that I think all of us should be able to talk about and, kind of use that as some sort of knowledge basis. It maybe not like ground everything on your personal experience or lived experience, but it's a factor. And the lived experience says postmodernism, or that the idea basically is that that truth is not really a thing. It's just kind of up there. You make your own truth. It's usually in mantras like live your own truth, you do you, manifest this, all of that stuff, which it kind of includes a little bit of new age stuff. But they're just fed up with it. And they're just like, we need something to grasp onto, because we can't have our feet planted in midair, because like there's no foundation to walk on. So I'm excited to hear what it's like over there. Especially in a country that's on my bucket list. It's a beautiful country too. That was one of the things I fell in love with, is just the landscape. Especially Edinburgh. The west coast of Scotland is where you get all the rain. And yes, the east coast has rain as well, but nowhere near as much. And so if you plan to visit, it's good to go see, Fort William, Glasgow, the West Coast. There's beauty there. But when you want a relief from the rain, come to the East Coast.
Okay. That's fair. All right. So you mentioned something that you wanted to really, or that you actually, tossed aside for the Sunday. You may have mentioned a little bit, but what was that something that you tossed?
So the main point from Sunday was that God provides absolutely everything we need, and there's great comfort and peace that brings. God, we talked about how God provides through His presence, through His word, and through His mission. And the point I failed to make and really should have brought up as well is, how do we handle that when we're experiencing need? I mentioned that it's sad to see that we live in a world where we need a foster system. And this month, the church has been gathering supplies to support foster care and being taught and talked a lot about it. But when we're actually living through real need, what does that mean? How do we apply this truth? It can be a cold truth just to say, well, believe it. And or something like that. Or it can bring on feelings of guilt and shame of, oh, I must not be believing enough or trusting enough because I'm experiencing these things. I just want to say, when we experience that, that's a sign of the fall, of the big picture of the consequences of sin. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's something we've done wrong or our parents have done wrong or something like that. And in fact, it gives us an opportunity to see where God will bring that help. And it provides an opportunity for the church then to step up and follow God in that mission. One of the ways God provides is through providing us with His mission. And if we're experiencing need, and we're looking for how God will provide, he'll provide through his church, through one another, coming alongside us, hearing us out, and helping us.
Yeah, that's really I think foundational, especially coming out of our Multiply initiative, because we talked a lot about giving, about how God can bless the cheerful giver, and it obviously not in like the health, wealth, prosperity type of way, but there is a sense of like completeness whenever you do give to not just like your local church or an organization like our children and youth, or like our county's children and youth, but to missionaries, which you're one of them. I'm one of them. We have to raise our own support to not just keep the lights on, but to continue doing the work that God has called us to do. And there's just something there that, presence, word, and mission is just one of the, like, that's a really good way of thinking about it. Because without God's presence, we wouldn't have that, like, gut, like I'm losing the word. I would say maybe the power, the passion to give, but then we are encouraged by the word, and then that's what sends us on mission. Yeah. And like the cool part is thinking about it from like from a missionary standpoint. It's like, I can't go over to Edinburgh. Like, if I'm going over to Edinburgh, I'm not going to do mission work. Yeah. I'm going over to just have fun.
Yeah. See the Highlands, do a whiskey tour or something like that.
Yeah. Whatever it might be. But it's not going to be for what you're going for. And that's the beauty of giving to missions, in whether it's global or local, like what we want to be able to do, or we're just not capable of doing, that God has blessed the world to be able to do that through different people who have that desire. And that's where, big sending teams and things like that are just not just a blessing for the church, but a blessing for the missionary as well. Because they're not just the financial investors. They are the, like, almost like that church congregation that backs you as like a pastor type thing.
Yeah. And, we talk, I try not to use donor language too much, but more partnership language.
Yes. I like that
really
as well.
A partnership that, I'm looking for financial donations. That's sort of the thing I need to be able to.
That's the legal way of talking about it.
Yeah. But it really is that partnership. And that then includes, your prayer partnership. That includes different areas of support. When I'm in America, when missionaries are on home assignment, there's, need for a vehicle, need for a place to stay, these other tangible ways that we need help. And the church comes alongside and provides and partners in those. And then, as missionaries, I'm a prayer. I pray every day. And I love to pray for my partners. And, it's part of my job to be praying for the people I'm working with, but also the people who are sending me to work with them.
Yeah. And it's one of the best things is to get a prayer request from a partner. Like to say, hey, I trust you with this. Would you just pray for me here? Yeah. Like super specific, like, there's just something like that reach out, where it's not just, the prayer and the financial support that they're giving, but there's something that you can also give as well, even if you're thousands of miles away, which I think like Paul talks about all the time. Not you, Paul.
The Apostle Paul, when I was in Philadelphia, when I first got there, the first Sunday, I heard from the elementary teacher that one of the kids said, "Oh, the Apostle Paul came to our church today."
No.
My beard was a lot bigger then.
Well, okay, then it makes sense. Yeah. Did you trim the hair in your beard, or the sideburns? Yeah. You should have let that grow a little bit.
Have the nice locks and stuff.
There's a big Hasidic Jew population in Philly, you would have fit in pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah. And it's something that missionaries just, we love to do that. We love to be able to do that. 'Cause for us, for some reason, it gives us joy.
Yeah.
Well, I think for every Christian, it should give us joy to be able to pray, not just for the people in our family and like our local church, but for those who are sending us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of Philippians 2 and, the first half of the chapter is a great theological point. And sometimes we forget the second half of that chapter, which is all about Paul talking about this with both Timothy, who he's about to send, and then Epaphroditus, who the Philippians have sent to him. And it's all about that partnership. And joy is like the theme of that book and the theme of that section of, I find joy and relief because of, all these conversations and this partnership, your prayer, your financial support, all these things.
Yeah. And it's, I forgot what I was going to say, so I was trying to figure out how to swing it in and remember it. But it was that, Paul says, like, even though I'm not with you presently, I'm with you in spirit through prayer. And that, I inserted through prayer, but that's really what he's getting at, is he's praying for them constantly because he knows that he wouldn't be able to do the work without them, but also they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing for him without him praying for them. And all of the other,
That's the thing I love about 1 Corinthians when he starts off and he says, I thank God always in my remembrance of you, which he says in most letters. But the fact that he says that in 1 Corinthians and then goes to rebuke them so harshly, it's like, okay, there is great love even if there are, real things. And that shows, the depth of partnership that can be there of like, hey, even though we're separated by distance, I want to know what's going on. I want to know the issues. And you need people who are physically present with you to really deal with them, but I can still be a support, a prayer partner, and part of your life. Yeah.
And that is like, I'm going to say it ad nauseum. Like that's one of the best parts about the job.
Yeah.
So going back into verse 8 here. So one of the things that I'd like to look at, and every time it pops up, is I always like to clarify. So, and I'm not sure if you did in the sermon. I took some time with my family this weekend, so we weren't in church, but where it says the Lord God, and Lord is in caps. I'm not sure if it is in the Bible that you're looking at. But when you see that as someone who's gone to seminary, probably done some language work and things like that, what does Lord in all caps mean?
Yeah, it's the Hebrew word Yahweh, or how we would pronounce it as Yahweh, the holy name of God.
Yeah.
And out of respect, the Jewish community, they didn't want to say the name of the Lord so that they wouldn't be breaking the third commandment of not taking his name in vain.
Yeah.
And that gets into our English Bibles as Lord in all caps.
Yep.
And, I didn't really make too much of a point of that on Sunday, but it is, that Yahweh God, the one true God who is the one at work here, planting this garden.
Yeah, and it's, so I think that's called the Tetragrammaton. I'm not a Hebrew guy. I'm not a Greek guy.
I love the language,
I just like the
Greeks. The terms.
Yeah, I like the Greek guys. That's about it.
Yeah.
I don't know anything of their language. I know a few words from like the word studies that I did in school, but that's about it.
Yeah.
I think that's super important, especially given the context of Genesis in general. Like it's not Adam and Eve. The Adam and Eve aren't the audience for this. It is Moses. It's the Hebrews or the Israelites who are now wandering through the desert, and they're trying to figure out life.
Yeah.
And they're constantly going back to, maybe we should go back to Egypt. We had food, we had everything that we needed.
Yeah.
Our life was horrible, but we had everything that we needed. So I'm trying to situate that, because that's a very interesting
point.
Mindset, yeah.
And you get to this verse, and it's Lord God has planted garden in Eden in the east. and there he placed the man he had formed. It gives you that, okay, the Lord God is providing. He's giving you this garden, and it goes on to describe the garden in the next few verses as, all kinds of trees, good for eating, good for looking at. So there's beauty, there's provision for food, and there's God himself dwelling there. And, it's called Eden is a place, and then there's a garden in Eden. And, I spent some time researching that out because it's a fascinating theme that then flows through the rest of the Bible. And I talked a bit about it in the sermon of, okay, we really need to understand Eden to understand God's provision. Because it's a complex thing that, just reading through this quickly, you can easily miss what's all going on when he talks about Eden.
Yeah, and I was looking through the rest of the earlier in the first chapter. So chapter 2 in verse 4, that is the first time in the Bible that we see that Lord being in all cap. And that was just really interesting to me, thinking about, okay, which God is this? And then it's almost as if there was no real need for a clarifier until then.
And verse 4 is a great turning point, right?
It is.
We get the story of creation, Genesis 1 through to 3, and God speaking everything into existence and then resting. And then we get the phrase, this is the account of the heavens and the earth. And it starts a formula that's used throughout the rest of Genesis and breaks up Genesis into different sections, where usually it starts with a genealogy or something like that, where this is the account of, and lists some things out and then tell some stories. And so we get, sort of the first chapter, which is the, what's it called at the beginning of a book?
A prologue?
Prologue.
Okay.
Yeah, prologue or something like that. The preface that gives you sort of the big picture.
Yeah.
And now we're going to start in on what we would call chapter 1 in the way we write books today. And it restates, and, Genesis 2, 4 and following, it retells creation. And instead of that highly poetic language of the 7 days of creation or 6 days of creation, 7th day of rest, we get, the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. It's done. And we're not given the details of, how exactly did it go about. We're given a few more details in the next few verses. But it's also that narrowing down to the Lord God, that covenant name for God, for Yahweh, the one who is in relationship with his people. And that relationship then is the focus of this retelling of creation, that it's about Adam and Eve. It's about his relationship with them.
So when you were looking and researching Eden as a place, and then the garden in Eden, so I know we have no idea where Eden is, and speculation is one of the fun things about about this, because we don't get anything other than the name. There's
Tigris and Euphrates, and so we know it's somewhere in what we would call the Middle East today. Either what would that be? Eastern Turkey, northern Iraq, or southern Iraq, Gulf area. And in my research of it, it's like I could find maps, and it's like, well, Eden's either up here or down here. We're not sure when it talks about the rivers whether it's the river from Eden is the headwaters or where they all come together. You could make arguments for either one. And so we know it's generally in that region, but we don't know exactly.
I was curious
exactly where.
So if, based on your research, where would you place it? Northern or southern?
I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't come down to a one or the other. It makes more sense for it to be southern in terms of we see all the rivers, a lot of rivers combining there, and so geographically that makes sense as rivers come together, and then but then that's not what the text says. It says it makes it sound more like it's the headwaters. And it's like, okay, are we understanding the Hebrew way of speaking here correctly or not? So it's like I don't know.
I was just curious because I haven't that is one thing I have not done. I have not tried to dig into where I'm at. So like, I was curious if in just sermon prep. Yeah.
And it was like, I don't see the need for a hard position on this. And, I see more of the reality that it was a real place is important, that, it's giving us these geographical markers that the people in Exodus would know the names of these rivers, would know, where in the world this was. But then we get to Genesis 3 and we see that humanity is removed from the garden, kept out of the garden, kept out of Eden.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so it's a real place, but they're not there anymore. And we know from life today that, it's not easy, but we can go anywhere on the earth. and so it starts to bring home the fact that Eden is both this physical place at that time, as well as a spiritual realm.
Yeah. It's, there's a lot in the first 3 chapters that are both of them.
Yes.
and I've said this on previous episodes of the podcast where like Raphael and I have talked and kind of keep rehashing that it's not just a one or the other, it's a both and. And now we have to really figure out, okay, how do we make sure that we're being faithful to both? And that maybe not hardlining on one certain position of Genesis 1 through 3 is like the answer. There might be some more hermeneutically strong things that are going on, but there's also might be some more non-biblical or extra biblical evidence that might push back against that a little bit. And the question then is not necessarily which one is right, which one's wrong. It's how do we take the evidence, with the structure of Psalm 19, how do we take the evidence that God has placed in the earth and the cosmos and in Scripture, and how do we combine them to one big harmonious account of not just origins, but the world? So that's one of the things that that has kind of become one of my big passions, especially regarding Genesis and the first couple chapters. It's like there's a whole lot of debate here, and I'm not sure it's any one position. It might be a combination, because you used like highly poetic language, and some people might even be like no, it's history, it's literal history. And or some people would be like, that's too strong of a word. You need to go even more figurative.
So from a member in the Presbyterian Church of America, the PCA, and they allow for and I pursued ordination a little bit a while back, and they allow for 4 different views of creation. And so I'm trying to use language that's like, okay, it's broadly acceptable across these 4 views. Highly poetic doesn't mean it's not literal or can be understood as saying real things. But it also hints that, there's a really clear structure here that is a poetic structure.
And there's like this, we can call it poetic framework. Where we see this like work rest period that's not just a 7-day thing. It's expanded into years at certain points. Like I think in Leviticus, it lays out those things. It's been a while since I've read through Leviticus. It can be a slog, but it's really interesting. But where maybe it's Deuteronomy. It's one of the two.
Probably more Deuteronomy. I'm not remembering it from Leviticus right now. But.
So, but regardless, so it's like you have 6 years of work, and then you have a year of rest for the fields, and then
now I'm remembering.
And the Jubilee
years every 50 years and stuff.
Then so you have a period of work and servitude. You can sell yourself into slavery to cancel debts and things like that.
That is Leviticus.
That's where I was.
It's like all those legal ramifications. Yes.
So you work for a certain number of years, and then on the next year, your debts are paid. You're now free. You get your land back. And all of this stuff, and now you can go and be fruitful and multiply. So it's really cool to see how Genesis 1 through 2-4 kind of really like, which always bugged me, why they just cut it why they cut it before like
I forget exactly who the people were who put the verses and chapters and verses in.
Yeah.
It's like there's some places like here where it's like, oh, it would be so helpful if you just moved it a little bit.
Four more verses, 3 more verses, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
But I know that had stuff to do with like the scrolls and things like that.
Yeah.
But we see that rhythm.
Yeah.
And bringing it back into the garden, that rhythm, I'm sure, was in place in the garden, even if it wasn't explicitly written down yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that was one of and talking about Eden, it's the place where God dwells and where he, in his word, is telling Adam and Eve about life, how to live. Mm-hmm. And, in verse 15, I think it's 16, no, 15. Yeah. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. We're not told what God said about that, but we're assuming he said something that he's telling them, maybe that 7-day cycle of, we need to work, you need to care for things, and rest in this way. Mm-hmm. And we can assume, God is describing it in this pattern. And we see that he is giving man this work to care for creation, to use the gifts that he's given him and to expand the garden. Yeah.
And I mean, God's done a lot of talking already. Mm-hmm. So it's, I think, a safe bet to say, like, when God said, like, whenever God is, what's going on in the background of that verse specifically, I would say I'd hedge my bets on God's actually telling him these things, whether that is through the Spirit in a certain way, or maybe it's the Son doing it. Because usually whenever we see word and in the Old Testament, like the Word of God, that's some sort of Christophany.
Pointing forward to John 1:1.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which that made my mind go in a totally different direction, but we're going to stay here. But yeah, so that's just one of those things where I think as we're going through, not just reading Genesis 1-3, but even the rest of the Bible, ask ourselves, okay, is this describing the situation, or is this prescribing something?
Yeah.
Or is it maybe doing both?
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing to do, but that requires a lot of study, that requires a lot of prayer and contemplation and meditation. Mm-hmm. And
it requires a lifestyle where you're walking with God.
yeah, exactly. Which all of that is just that lifestyle. You're constantly meditating on these things. So if you were to pick, and I know I'm throwing you on the spot here. So if you were to pick one point of your sermon that you would rehash over and over and over again, that's just like, I felt this was the point for our church, what would?
It'd probably be that how God provides through mission, because I think all the other points wind up there.
Okay.
All the other points sort of when what God provides and how he provides through his presence and word, they are great foundations, but when you go to apply them, it's going to be a mission. And so, and that's, that was one of the big things for me in studying out Eden, is it's this place where God calls us into mission and where God gives us mission. And so that's why I jumped to 15, because verse 8 and verse 15 say sort of the same thing, only it's different people doing it, right? So in verse 8, God plants the garden, and verse 15, he takes man and puts him in the garden and tells him to care for it. And it's, giving him the same work that he's already done. And I mentioned this Sunday, one of the commentaries I was reading talked about how God didn't make a perfect world. And it was sort of like, wait a second. And it says, hold on. Okay, God made a good world. And that's what Genesis 1 reiterates. And there is a Hebrew word for perfect, but God looks at what he made and says it's good, it's tov. And it goes on to say, the perfecting of the world is what God has in mind. And he starts in the Garden of Eden, making a place that's perfect for his presence and perfect for his people.
Mm-hmm.
And then with his people is perfecting the rest of the world. And, that gets back to the point I wanted to hash more of, like, how do we live this out when either we're experiencing need or we see our neighbor experiencing need? We are the hands and feet of God, showing his love to neighbor, to one another, being God's provision.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, I like that a lot. So random offshoot off of that. So because that reminds me, and kind of we've already mentioned how there's certain camps that are just very like strongly here and anti this. Because I was taught that God made a perfect world, and then sin entered, and now it's not perfect anymore. And the Hebrew, from what you just said, like completely disrupts that.
And it's I think the commentator was being a bit provocative in the way he phrased it, as am I. And because there's
don't name any names.
Well, I think it was on the slide.
Okay, then name them. Go for it.
So, but it gets us to think. Okay, there's the quick reading, which is he made a good world, and good means free from sin, perfect, and we can associate that then with the idea of perfection. But then we get into this where it's like, okay, Genesis 2:6, I think it is talking about 5 and 6, how, the rain's not falling, but God's providing mist to come up and water the ground. But then it's still not really habitable. It's, it's not till the garden that we get this picture of trees good for food. And it's like, okay, it's good. It's capable of perfection. All the things are there for it. There's nothing wrong with it. And its end, it's where God is bringing it, is perfection. And so that idea of God creating a perfect world is still there. It's just, instead of we're at the end point already, it's, oh, by the way, that's where God's taking us.
Because I mean, if not, then why would he tell Adam to work it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And why would it, like, and then that also kind of brings in some of like, I've been doing a lot of sermon thinking in the past couple months, sermon style thinking. So like how do we find Jesus in these type of things, where when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, this is why Jesus grew. Because Jesus was like the perfect human, but that doesn't mean that he was necessarily perfect in every way, because if not, then he would have just like poof arrived in fully like 30 some year old guy, just probably big, strong, like what we would think of as maybe like the perfect physique. But we see him defy his parents for the sake of the gospel, but we see him defy his parents and grow in wisdom and stature and these type of things, which hints back at this, where there's still, Jesus is good and he's perfect and he's a perfect human, but he's still growing, and that there's growth for us as well in a world that's obviously broken. But even if we were still in Eden, we would still be required to grow in certain ways. You think about just learning a language. As babies, we don't understand what babies are babbling about, and we teach them to talk. And I can't help but assume that's just the way the world is, even before the fall. Adam, breath of God right in there to a fully formed man. Okay, that says that right there. That makes sense. Eve created, we get that in just a few verses. And it's like, okay, there's that. So God starts with formed man, and then has his plan of how they would procreate and continue their being is through having children, training them, growing them. And then we see Christ going through that himself, which points to his humiliation as well as then more glorious exaltation. And it reminds me of thinking about the plants and everything, and not really taking too much into account of like interbreeding between could say maybe conscious-y type of animals, like birds and ducks or apes, whatever it might be. Where there was a biologist from Lehigh, just down, like 2 hours down the road. He has a quote, and he basically says that if in order to, or I should say, let me back up a little bit. Once God created the world, the process and the mechanisms of things like natural selection just started, because like that's where, you're not going to be able to say, hey, bee, don't go from plant to plant, go from this plant to the same type of plant, and you're confined to that type of plant now. Like we see obviously it's in a post-fall world, but we see, a bee going from a dandelion to a lily to a rose. And there's all this cross-pollination that's happening. And sometimes we see interbreeding of plants.
These hybrids that come about from it.
Just kind of naturally. So it's like that's kind of like I wouldn't say full out like neo-Darwinian type of thinking, but there's this process of gene selection, natural selection, and all through random mutation and things like that. It's like it's completely random where that bee goes. I mean, he's going to food sources, not really trying to plan out, okay, I'm going to daffodils today, I'm just going to daffodils. And
that's just a reminder there of like the study of the natural world, seeing how all these things come together. When we look at science and de-Christianized science, some of their results or their findings, they show us pictures of what's going on in the world, and it's good to know their insights and their studies, but it also shows we can't help but bring our assumptions. And but God calls us to be studying, to be looking at how has He made the world, and it's part of following that call to then tend and care for it. And so, it's good to go into the sciences. It's good to learn these things, to be aware that we have different assumptions about how it all started and its end point of perfection that, it goes against, the law of entropy, right? That we see that God is bringing us to perfection, not disorder. And we see that's what makes the world so strange, because the world, even though it's so broken, hasn't completely destroyed itself yet.
Strangely. We're doing a bang up job. But well, and that was it. Einstein said it. He's got a really, really famous quote where he's like, what's so inconceivable, or what's so I'm gonna butcher this because I haven't actually read it. I've just heard it.
Gotcha.
But basically, he's saying what's crazy about the world is that it's not crazy. He uses language in like a total they clash. That what's understandable about the world is what makes it so ununderstandable. Like that's so crazy to think about that. We have all of this around us, but we can understand it. And as Christians, we're like, oh, that's the image of God in us. That's something that's beautiful that we should be embracing. But as we bring those assumptions, those presuppositions to the table, we're not using any different data, like the data set of what the science is bringing to us. It's the assumptions that we bring to the table that color how we, or what conclusions we get to. So, there was mention of garden there, and that's kind of, we can't not talk about plants.
Exactly.
But so with that, where, as we wrap up, where can people find out more about? Obviously, find out more about you, but find more about, was missions to the world. Missions to the world, and your work that you're going to in Edinburgh. Like, where can people find that out?
So I try to maintain a website.
Okay.
Praywithpaul.com.
Okay.
simple, amazing. I got that URL, but I did. And I've got sort of write-ups of the work I'm doing, the invitation to go there. I believe on the site you can also find links to Cornerstone, the church I'll be working with, and links to how to support there as well.
Yeah.
Supportpaul.org was also free, so that redirects to my MTW page.
Okay, that's very, very. That's much more creative than mine. Yeah, but like, so that's really cool.
And so on the website too, I have a list of like previous sermons, and if I remember it this week, I'll post the full manuscript from Sunday's sermon as well as the link to the video. Okay. And so you can, if you don't remember that footnote of that commentator and you want to like, okay, who is this guy, and see some of the other things like that, that'll be on the website as well.
Nice. That's very thorough. I like it.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. So, before we actually wrap things up, what is one thing that our church and anyone else that watches this, that comes across it, that's like, I want to support Paul, obviously by doing all of these other things, checking out the website. What's something that as soon as they're done listening or watching that they can just pray for?
For this truth to really take root in my heart, trusting that God provides absolutely everything, pray that I would trust in that I would live that out, and that I would, in living that out, be showing that to other people, that they would see how God is providing through me, through the church, what they need for life and godliness. That, as I, in praying for that it would be in both my actions and my speech, that I would be bold to offer help, bold to give a reason for the hope that I have, both as I travel around America asking for support and asking for partners, as well as when I'm actually in Scotland and supporting and discipling people in the church, as well as meeting people on the street and inviting them into the Christian community.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. So thank you, Paul, for the sermon. Thank you for and sharing a little bit about what you're going to be doing in the next however long. So if you are you're sitting there or watching, listening, whatever it might be, and you're just like, hey, I want to support Paul, please do that. Get behind him. It's wonderful that he's going to Edinburgh, not just because it's wonderful, but because God has placed it on his heart to just minister to the people there. So, just also as a reminder, this is not a replacement for the Sunday sermon. This is, this is a supplement. It's a vitamin that you can take, and it's going to enrich what the sermon was about. So please, if you're listening, go back one podcast earlier. If you're watching, it is on the City Church YouTube channel. So please get involved, get into the sermon, but also get in a local church. If you are having a hard time finding one, please get a hold of us. You can email anyone on the staff website, and we will do our best to get you linked with a good, healthy church. We have tons of them with the network that we're a part of, and we also have tons of them if you're not from the U.S. We have tons of church plants, like the one in Edinburgh, and we have some in South Africa and all these other places that we would just love to connect you with if that's where you need. So, Paul?
Yeah, can I tie into that real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Because that speaks to the sermon point of presence, that we really need to be in God's presence and with God's presence, which includes his people. And so, get involved in a local communion, a local church, whether that's here or wherever you are in the world. That's a great call to have in these podcasts. So thank you for the sermon. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your heart and your passion for Edinburgh. And I'm excited to see what happens when you get there. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to see what God will do.
So thank you, everyone, for listening and watching, and we will see you all next week. God bless.